Let's talk about automobile decisions. When you're thinking of buying an automobile, you really want to go through the process very carefully and with as little emotion as possible. And I know that's easier said than done. But the first thing that you want to do is research your purchase thoroughly. Figure out what class of automobile you want. Research the various options or choices in that class and so on. Make your choice based on your needs as opposed to your wants to the extent possible. That's very, very important. Negotiate the price. I know there are some dealers that say that they have what's called no haggle pricing, but pretty much everything in business is negotiable. Even if it's not the price, maybe you can arrange for favorable financing. Make sure you understand the terms of the sale before the purchase, because what's typically the first question a car salesman will ask you when you enter the dealership? Maybe I shouldn't say the first question, but as you get closer to pulling the trigger and actually making the purchase, one of the things they'll typically ask you is, what kind of monthly payment are you looking for? Well, if you understand the time value of money, then you know that they can try to get to your monthly payment, your desired monthly payment, in a number of ways. They can adjust interest rates, they can adjust term, which is most common. So if you're saying that you want this car at this monthly payment, then they can do that by giving you an extended term in some cases, and that's not necessarily what you want. So make sure you understand all of the terms of the sale before you sign for anything. And then you need to understand what the cost of ownership will be for this auto, meaning how much is it going to cost you to maintain and repair the auto after you make the purchase. So some factors to consider when you're choosing a car is it affordable? How much does it cost? Again, what's the cost of ownership? What are the operating costs related to this car? There are some cars that are just very expensive to maintain with regard to repairs. You know, just a new headlight is going to cost you several $100s as opposed to a different make or model. Do you want a gas-fueled car, a diesel, or a hybrid? And how will that impact the cost of operating the car? Do you want a new car, a used car, or a nearly new car? Do you understand, besides the fact that the ownership, the past ownership differences, do you understand what that means to go for used versus new, and what kinds of questions you should be asking in both cases? How big of a car do you need? You know, what are you going to be doing? Again, you should be making this decision based on needs and not wants. So do you really need a huge SUV if you have a small family and you're not hauling anything on a regular basis? You know, again, all of these factors are really based on your particular needs. Some other things to consider: are you trading in a car? And so how will that factor in? Do you have negative equity? Meaning, do you owe more than that car is worth? Fuel economy. You know, that's going to factor into your cost of ownership. So does this car that you're considering get good gas mileage? How big is the gas tank? How much is it going to cost you to fill it up? Does it have to have premium gasoline? What kind of safety features are there? If you have small children, you probably want as many airbags as possible. You know, what are the safety ratings? Remember when SUVs first came out, they had a lot of problems with rollover. So, just recently in the news, there was a huge recall on a number of domestic cars because of an ignition problem. So you want to know if there's any history of that sort of thing. So when you're making that transaction, again, you want to try to negotiate price if possible. You want to know what the sticker, if you can find out, you want to know what the sticker price is relative to the dealer's cost. Now, of course, a lot of dealers aren't going to tell you, but some will. And in some ways, you can find out what their cost is through the internet. So that will help you with negotiating, because if you know their cost and the sticker price, you know how much you have to work with, that difference in terms of negotiating. Now, what if you choose to lease a car? For some people, leasing might make sense. Typically not people who put a lot of miles on their car, because that becomes very expensive in leasing. But for someone who doesn't put a lot of miles on their car, likes to trade cars in fairly regularly, and is okay with always having a car payment, leasing may make sense. So it typically offers lower monthly payments. So if you were looking at the same car and considering a lease versus a purchase, a lease typically would have a lower monthly payment, because at the end of the lease, you don't own the car. So what that means to you, though, is if you don't care about that, you could get a more expensive car for the same payments as a less expensive car. You could have a lower down payment. But all of this means that you have that car for a specific period, and then at the end you have nothing. You turn the car in and you walk away, and you don't own the car. For some people who would just want a new car anyway, that's not a bad deal. So if you're thinking about leasing, then you need to understand the different types of leases. There's something called a closed-end lease, and that's what I was mentioning when I said you just walk away from the car when the lease is over. That's the most popular type of lease. An open-end lease, though, is one where your monthly payment is based on the car's residual value. How much is the car expected to be worth at the end of the lease term? And so then when you return that car, you just pay the difference if the car is worth less than that residual value, and then you can own the car. So your lease payment on a leased automobile is going to be based on the price of the car, which we call the capitalized cost. How much are we capitalizing in the lease? That forecasted residual value, how much is this car going to be worth? Remember, some cars retain their value much better than others. So what is the expected residual value of that car at the end of the lease term? What's the financing rate on the lease? And again, how long is the lease term? So now the question then is, should you lease or should you purchase? We've talked a little bit about the differences, so what specific question should you ask if you're trying to make that decision? Well, is it more or less costly to lease when you factor in all of the differences? And when the lease ends, do you want to return the car or do you want to buy the car? Are you okay with walking away with nothing, or do you want to keep that car? So let's stop there, and we'll come back and talk about the other key point of this chapter, and that's housing decisions. So we've covered automobiles, one major purchase, and then we'll come back and talk about housing.